So we are back again with another athlete story, and I am welcoming Kat Zempolich here to the show, and I am really interested in this one because I haven't had a lacrosse player on yet. And I actually love lacrosse. I actually got a chance to work with the NLL many years ago, and that's when I became really intrigued with lacrosse. Being able to interview a lacrosse player, that was like kind of chomping at the bit to do that. But let's start out easy, very simple. Kat, give us your background. Like I said, thank you for coming on with me, but give us your background. Where are you from? Talk about your family a little bit and let us know who you are.
Yeah. My name is Kat Zempolich. I grew up in Northern Virginia. Um, and I ended up going to Duke and played lacrosse for 4 years and graduated in 2018. And then I did a year of business school and decided to, well, I'm medically retired. So hung up the cleats and just focused on being a student at Duke at the Fuqua School of Business. And then from there, ended up entering, corporate, big girl, big job life. And 2 years ago, almost 2 years, I helped found Morgan's Message, which is a nonprofit that was founded in honor of a friend of mine, Morgan Rogers, who unfortunately died by suicide in 2019. And the nonprofit is really just focused on raising awareness and providing resources for student athlete mental health. So that's kind of high level spark notes of who I am and what I do.
I love it. I love it. So let's start out, with the athletic career when you were growing up. What sports did you play, and what made you want to become an athlete?
Yeah. To be honest, my parents were always like, the busier you are, the less you'll be in trouble. You'll get yourself into trouble.
Yeah.
That was kind of their like sneakers on, out the door, organized sports, like it'll keep you on the straight and narrow. And I started dancing when I was 3 or 4. So I started pretty early in like tap and like ballet dancing, and that was my main activity throughout really middle school. And throughout the way, I think I tried swimming, which I hated. I'm now a morning person, but growing up I was not a morning person, and practices were always at like 7 a.m. in the summer. And even as like a first grader, I never wanted to go. And so my parents were like, okay, well, this is clearly not fun for you. But beyond that, like soccer, field hockey, I loved basketball. I'm shorter though, and not great at shooting, so that was never going to work out. And lacrosse were kind of what I dabbled in.
Yeah. It sounds like you were pretty active, and I think your parents had the right idea of the busier you are with the good things, the less time you have for the bad. So you grew up just doing all of it, and that's really awesome. Now, were your parents athletes, or was it more so that they just wanted to keep you busy?
They were they hopefully will never listen to this. They're probably the least athletic people. Like my dad, I think wrestled in high school, but was not good at wrestling, and like tells like horror stories about how he would just get like absolutely thrown down on the mat. And my mom, I think, played softball for like a year, not athletic. But my dad's brother played baseball at Duke and football, and then my mom's siblings were all her brothers are all like 6'4", like huge, like so there's athleticism in our family, just not from my parents, which is I
Yeah.
think ironic. It's kind of funny because my sister plays lacrosse at Duke too, so
Yeah.
it's like yeah.
That's pretty cool. Now, any other siblings that you had growing up where there was, maybe some sibling rivalry or sibling motivation?
Um, No, I have two older brothers, and they both have autism. So they're 3 years above me, and really with them, my parents were like cross country, anything again, get like their rule was you have to play a sport a season, or else you don't like get allowances, you get in trouble. Like it was a non-negotiable kind of a thing.
Hmm.
And so they just ran cross country and track, and like we're not great at it, but kept up keeps us busy. And then I am 5 years older than my younger sister, so we really didn't have that much of an overlap, but she ended up kind of falling into whatever I liked. So she danced, she did the dancing thing. She really didn't like soccer that much, kind of like me. She was like fine with field hockey, but knew that I really liked it, and so that's kind of how she fell into that. And then lacrosse, funny enough, she like played lacrosse, but was awful at field. Like she was terrible. Like when she would pass the ball, she wouldn't even look at you when she passed the ball. And I remember like being like, "Oh, let's like bond over passing," and she was awful. And so they finally like stuck her in goal, and we're like, "Well, let's see if this works." In like seventh grade, and it stuck because now she's playing Division 1 lacrosse, which I still think is like funny though, thinking back to like when she was younger, and I'd be like, I can't do this. And my dad would be like, be patient, like this is how you get better. And I'd be like, no, this sucks. So no real rivalries. I think there was a lot of pressure on her though to perform and be good at the sports that I was good at. But luckily for me, I kind of got to pave my own way, and I never felt the pressure of having an older sibling who was really, really good at something and you just being their little sister or like being the little brother, which I had a lot of friends who that was the case. So I got to forge my own way.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So what, as you're growing up and trying to figure out what sport is truly going to be yours as you pave your way, when does it kind of set in that lacrosse is going to be that sport? And did you kind of stop playing other sports and just focus on lacrosse, or was it still soccer and a bunch of other sports throughout high school?
So my biggest sport was dance. And I was dancing probably like 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, plus or minus some. And I had to make a decision in eighth grade. Either I wasn't playing club at this point. So I wasn't playing like travel field hockey or lacrosse, but those were my two other sports. I was not going to be good at soccer. I cannot run. I do not have that endurance, and I hated the offsides rule. Anyway, so I had to make a decision at the end of eighth grade if I wanted to basically not play high school sports and like do the whole dance route where I would go to like a dance school and it would get really intense. And I didn't even know what life would look like as a professional dancer. Like I didn't really see kind of an end goal at the end of all of that. And so I ultimately decided that I was going to stop dancing and just focus on lacrosse and field hockey and like see where that led me. And I always knew I wanted to do something in college, like play collegiately, but I didn't know what that could look like and what that was going to be. And so I really didn't focus on lacrosse or field hockey until I was a rising freshman in high school, which I feel like is it's a late time frame for a lot of kids. And I don't think I really grasped that when I was starting to focus on them. Like I didn't really think anything of it.
Yeah. Did you, how did you make the decision that, I mean, I know you said, you weren't sure what being a professional dancer really looked like, but, did you sit down with your parents, weigh pros and cons? How did you kind of come to the conclusion that it was going to be more of the field sports instead of the dance school that was going to be your path?
I mean, to be honest, and this might not be the best thing to think about. I'm someone who I think that, and I think of this in the corporate world too, now that I'm like a working person, is like, I think at times a lot of people rely on tenure or seniority and are like, okay, if you have 3 years of experience, then you can come in at a higher position. And people who work hard and consistently show that they can do the job better than other people can't necessarily like climb, right? Like can't necessarily get that credit. And it's like, okay, that's great, but like wait your 3 years. And I felt like I had the opportunity outside of dance. Like in dance, I was someone who like I was on point early, which is like the wooden blocks basically where you dance on your toes. And I wasn't getting the parts and things that I wanted. And it was because I was younger. It was like they wouldn't pull me up because I was younger, because I was this. And I was like, this is stupid. Like I was like, if I'm the best and if I'm like really good and I should be the lead or I should be this part or this part, and the only reason that person's getting it is because they're like 2 years older and it wouldn't be fair. Like that didn't sit well with me. And I was like, I know that you can't always have that, but I figured in sports I would have more of an opportunity to be able to earn it in terms of like it doesn't matter. And it'll vary, right? Like coach to coach, but I felt like for the most part, the coaches that I knew who were coaching the sports, they didn't care if you were a freshman or if you were a senior. It was like if you were performing, you'd be on the field. And I think that was the pool to play field sports. And then also beyond that, just like I had so many friends who played field hockey and I knew I would have fun and I was good at it. Like I was like, I might not be the best right now, but I know I can like work my way to get there, get close to there. So that was, I like didn't like my dance situation. So I was like, F this, I'm not doing this. Which is funny. My parents kind of are always like, they're like with me, like I just like, I don't know. It's like if it's not working out for me, I like find a different route and like do something else where like I feel like the playing field's more even. And I've always been that way.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. So, you made the decision to go the sports route, somewhere where you felt you could really earn your position on the field. Do you feel like that's kind of been, and I know you kind of touched on it, but do you feel like that's kind of been your mindset from an early age, and it's really kind of shaped and sculpted your mindset as an adult now, of just being in places where you feel you can earn your keep?
Yeah, and I think being in places where even if you're not necessarily on the field, you're learning and you're being challenged in some aspect. Because I got to college, and I'm sure we'll get to this. I got to college and I stepped on the field like when we were killing other teams. Like I was truly like a scout. Like I valued my time on scout team and like pretending to be the other offense or the other defense or whatever it was and didn't really play, but there was never a moment where I didn't feel like I was learning or growing or that like I wasn't necessarily like earning. I don't know if that makes sense, but otherwise, yeah, like I'm pretty driven and motivated to be like goal oriented, working towards goals, and even if they're really small, it's kind of how I am.
Yeah. So as a student, what kind of student were you? Was school coming easy to you? Were you kind of being the same that you were as an athlete, where you were seeking out like, really trying to earn it? Or, were you just kind of that student athlete that did very well and was balancing things very easily?
I will give my genetics a lot of credit. My dad is probably the smartest person I know. Well, I work with someone who's like actually he's a genius, but my dad is very, very smart and does not have like if he worked, as hard as he was naturally smart, he like and he knows that. He's like, whatever comes naturally to me, like I don't need to work at it. That was kind of how I was in high school. Like I was very just things come easily to me. And I'm very aware of that. And I would say like there's some people who are street smart and some people who are book smart, and I luckily have both. Not to like toot my own horn. And I in high school did not work as hard as I should have my first 2 years. And that's not to say like I was still getting A minuses, B pluses, like I graduated with above a 4.0, but it wasn't until junior year where I realized like if I want to get into a school like Duke or if I want to get into an Ivy, like I really got to kick it up a notch. And that was when that kind of switched. And I was like, okay, like at the end of the day, it's all on me. Like I can't blame a teacher for a grade. Like it comes back to me and it comes back to how I'm performing. And that took a while to flip on in my head. And then that in college, I went through the same thing where the first like year, 2 years, like I was like, okay, I'll just rely on like, my brain being like a good brain. And then you're surrounded by kids who are just like unbelievably brilliant. And you're like, shit, this isn't going to work. which was a rude awakening. So that's kind of where once I realized that I couldn't just like skate by, I turned on the jets and kind of invested the time in the studies.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit more. You said that you had a little bit of a rude awakening. I've talked to people that were just like, I didn't think school mattered, and I was just there to be an athlete. I did what I needed to do to stay eligible, things like that. But like, what was the rude awakening that you had when you got to college academically?
I came into Duke as a recruited walk-on. So I got into Duke on my own and I had a spot on the team, and like they had my name on a list, but the spots were all taken in terms of like monetary, and
Hmm.
I knew I wanted to go to Duke and I knew I'd have a spot on the team. And so I was like, okay, like I'll get in whenever. I get there and I got like a 2.9 my freshman fall. And to put that in perspective, I graduated from high school. Granted, everything's inflated. I graduated from high school with like a 4.3. So I'm like all AP class, like all college AP classes in high school. Like I worked really hard, but it wasn't like I wasn't killing myself to do it kind of a thing.
Hmm.
Like I was able to balance like hanging out with friends on the weekends, like getting all these awards and whatever. And I got to college and I remember like end of first semester getting a 2.9 and my dad just being like, I'm not paying for Duke if this is like what you're gonna do. Like he was like, who do you think's gonna hire you with a 2.9? Like he's like, what do you think? You're just gonna like dick around for 4 years and then you're
Hmm.
gonna be like set because you have Duke on your resume? Like he's like, yeah, Duke has a good amount of pool, but he's like, sister, like this is like your life basically. And I realized through kind of that and being like, I'm ashamed of saying what my GPA is. Like I wouldn't tell anyone. And I was like, if I'm so ashamed of it, like I have the power to like change it and
Hmm.
adjust and like pick classes that don't just like sound interesting, but also are things that I am good at. Like I took classes that were not my jam and I just thought I could like handle them. But ultimately being a female athlete and playing lacrosse, like I knew there was not going to be longevity in my lacrosse career. Like I knew from the jump it was going to be 4 years and then I was going to, hang up the cleats, like hang up the stick. And I think from that perspective, it's like make the most of your 4 years, but also know that the next 4 years also make the next 40 years in terms of what you're doing in the classroom and the connections you make both on and off the field and the networking you can do. And I don't think it really like clicked until even grad school, but I don't know. I think being a female athlete, you have to think of it differently. Like I think a lot of male athletes have this like they're very naive. Like
Hmm.
they're confident, but they're also like naive to the realism of like you're probably not gonna have a like professional career after you graduate, but they come in thinking they will, right? And I think that hits them later. But for female athletes, I think it's we keep it in the back of our, and I don't want to generalize, but I think we keep it in the back of our heads that like there's no money also in female athletics, so you kind of have to figure it out.
Yeah.
That was such a long-winded answer, but did that make sense?
It completely did, and as an athlete, I mean, I went D3, so I didn't go D1, so I kind of knew right off the bat, the professional ranks isn't really going to be where I end up. I knew it was a possibility because I had seen a couple other football players go D3 to D1 or D2 to D1 or even on to the pros or anything else, but you know, you do have that, that thought that, maybe if I play really hard and I make some sort of play that I can get discovered and go to the NFL. So I understand completely what you mean. I had guys that I played with Division 3 that were getting looked at from NFL teams. And, we had NFL scouts at teams and things like that. But I don't think that a lot of us thought we were going to go on to the NFL, but there were obviously conversations. We'd be in the gym talking about, hey, we're going to make some plays this week and we're going to end up on Sports Center and get discovered,
Yeah.
right? So things like that certainly did happen. Now, when you came in as a freshman and, academically, before we even, get back to the field, did you declare a major, or were you kind of taking some gen eds?
This is so bad to say out loud. I went to Duke and I didn't realize that liberal arts meant there was no business undergrad. I went to Duke because I loved the campus and I knew it was a good school. You didn't have to declare a major when you applied. I had
Mhm.
no idea. And I got there and I was like, wait, there's no business undergrad? Like I look back and I'm like, I was so just not even looking at like some of the important things of colleges and picking where you go to school. Granted, I'm really lucky because, Duke is such a great school, not to take anything away from other colleges, but like going to like, a Virginia Tech, like engineering is their big thing. So I don't know. I didn't really think about it, and then I didn't declare a major. You had until sophomore spring, like beginning of sophomore second semester, to declare your major. And so I took like a year and a half of like looking at what other girls on our team were majoring in and then what paths they were going into and what like former alums had done with their majors, and started kind of thinking through it like that.
Mhm.
I also, for the longest time, wanted to go to law school. So I had that in the back of my mind, but then I realized quickly that I was like, I can't do 3 more years of school. That sounds like a nightmare. Um, no offense, my dad's a lawyer. No offense to all the lawyers out there, but I came in and I tried to think about like a mix of things, like what would I actually enjoy studying? Because
Mhm.
if I'm gonna study something, I want to at least take a class a semester where I'm interested. Because I know I'm going to be challenged. Like I know I'm going to have that challenge piece, and I know I'm going to learn. But I want the content to be something that I'm interested in learning about. And then beyond that, like what are skills that I'll learn that I'll be able to apply to interviews or apply to jobs after school, or just like conversations I can have with other other smart people, really smart people that I'm around. And so with that, I landed in public policy. And the reason for that being was I was going back and forth. Do I want to do econ? Do I want to do political science? And with public policy, I found it was the perfect mix of quantitative and qualitative, where you would take, for example, like a bill that, and we would do like real life, like if a bill came up in the Senate or in the House, like we would see it and then we'd basically break it down, and you'd have to write these things called memos where you would look at the quantitative side. So like, okay, if the end result is they put a tax on whoever, like what's that trickle down effect going to be? Like how much are we going to make from the taxes? Are these people going to be upset? Like all of those aspects. And then you basically make a recommendation of like which policy you should pass and why.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really, really interesting because they were real world problems. Like I always struggled with these hypothetical textbook problems where it's like
Yeah.
Ginny has 4 oranges and yada yada. And I'm like, I want to see like what the impact is on real people. Like
Yeah.
I want to think about it as like balancing the ethics and morals with running a nation and dealing with a budget and all of that. So that long-winded way of saying that's how I ended up in public policy. And then I did for fun like a visual and media studies minor, and then what's essentially like a business certificate as my certificate for
Mhm.
undergrad.
So you sound like a very literal person, and when it comes to the academic side of just you don't want the superficial "how many oranges are left" type of question. You want
Yeah.
what's the true impact of this. So with that, let's talk a little recruiting and what schools were you looking at? Were you getting phone calls from a lot of schools? What was the real world impact that you kind of made, and did you sit down and talk to your dad about these things? Because he seems to be, like you said, the genius that he is. Was he kind of trying to chart like a path for you, and what schools were calling, and how are you kind of balancing all of the attention that you were getting?
Yeah, I would say I like to think of myself as an underdog. I wasn't getting a ton of attention, and I actually was trying to play field hockey in college.
Mm.
So that, and I mean, I was like looking at some ACC schools, like some, I think Big Ten, like Michigan State, like random schools like that where I knew the academics, because my dad's very logical. Like he's like, at the end of the day, at the end of the 4 years, like he's like, yeah, I'm paying for you to like play and have fun and like grow as a human, but also I'm paying for like what's at the top of your resume. Like
Yeah.
he's like very much so like, let's be real here. And I'm from Northern Virginia, where our in-state schools are great and they're very cheap. For like, you can go to UVA and pay like 20K a year, which is insane for the educate. Like, it's just insane. So
Hmm.
my parents the whole time were kind of like, all right, like you don't go, like you use your sport to get into a school that you wouldn't be able to get into without it, was their take on it. Was like, you're going to leverage your athletic ability to create opportunities that you otherwise wouldn't have. And so that's kind of how I looked at everything, and I knew that I had good enough grades where I wasn't going to be a hard recruit to get in. Like, it would be more so like, does she have the athletic skill? Not, is she academically going to be able to get in? Like, can we get her past admissions? Because I knew I wasn't a top recruit. So really, when I was looking at schools, it was from that stance of like setting me up for success in the long run. And I really give my dad a lot of credit, because I think I grasped it a little bit, but like when you're in high school, it just like seems cool to like get t-shirts and walk around and put on a jersey, right? It's like, and you know that it has some impact. And now that I'm out of it, I'm like, your choice for the wherever you go for 4 years has way more of an impact than you can ever really imagine as like a 16, 17, 18-year-old.
So, you talked a little bit about, getting the different gear from schools and wearing all this different stuff. What schools were on these t-shirts? What schools were you looking at to play field hockey at, since, lacrosse was kind of on the back burner?
Yeah, it was a lot of like Ivies. So I was looking at all the Ivies, looking at UVA, JMU, Stanford. Like I just wanted to shoot kind of for the stars. Like I was like, if I'm gonna try to do this, I might as well. I will not again. I had like this naive mindset that I could get into any in-state school I wanted to. Like I was like, oh yeah, getting into UVA, no problem. Like getting into UVA is very hard. Like,
Yeah.
oh, William and Mary, no problem. Like, and I think it was a blessing in disguise, because I never, like, I think a lot of people are kind of like, this is it, like scarcity, like it's either
Hmm.
this or nothing. And for me, it was like, if this doesn't work out, like I can go to UVA as a regular student, or I can do this as a regular student. Or I even thought like, oh, I'll get into Georgetown. Like that's easy. Like I don't know what I was thinking. But yeah, so it was schools, it was high caliber academic schools, not necessarily high caliber athletics.
Hmm.
And I tried to find the schools where there was a little bit of both. But at the end of the day, I was like, I'm okay if I never win a championship. And I'm okay if I never step on the field, but I want to go to like a good is relative, but I want to go to like a strong academic school. I didn't want to sell myself short,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Hmm. So when did lacrosse take over for field hockey then?
Sophomore year, not to insult anyone, but I had a string of not terrible, but like very harsh field hockey coaches. And it was like one after the next. And I was like, if all field hockey coaches are like this, I can't do this for 4 more years in college,
Yeah.
where it's every day for 3 hours a day. You're with this, like, in my mind, I was like, I, I can't. And I was way better at field hockey than I was at lacrosse, in my opinion. I mean, even my family will tell you that. Like, I was better at field hockey than I was at lacrosse, but I always loved my lacrosse teammates and my lacrosse coaches. And I always had such a good experience that I was like, if I ride the bench for 4 years, like, so be it. If I'm like the worst one on the team, so be it. Like, I can be a great teammate, and I'd only had good experiences. So I think like sophomore spring, when I had a really, really good spring season on my like varsity team after not really putting any effort into it until like freshman spring. That was when I made the decision that, and honestly, even my dad, like, he didn't think I had potential in lacrosse. Like, he was like, "Yeah, you're fine, but like, you're on JV as a freshman, like, you're probably not going to be able to like actually play." And then it wasn't until I did really well my sophomore year that we both were kind of like, "Wait a second, like, this could, if I get on the right team, like, this could be something like
Hmm.
this." Um, and yeah, it did. I mean, it worked out, which was awesome.
Yeah. Did you continue to play field hockey, or did you just go all in on lacrosse?
No, I played both, and I did gymnastics in the winter, which is where like the dance background came into play. I personally, and I coach a club team now. I personally think focusing on one sport does young athletes a disservice. I think you can learn a lot from, like, my two strengths in athletics are I have really good hands. Like, I have great hand-eye coordination, and I have really great spatial awareness. So part of that, and like playing basketball in elementary school for 5 years or whatever, that came into play in playing defense in lacrosse.
Hmm.
And like field hockey spacing and passing in field hockey, and switching fields, that came into play also in lacrosse, and like transitioning the ball. And so I think playing different sports in general really diversifies what you can do and how you can do it and how you think about things. And it allows you to be more creative in what you do. And I also didn't, I was really good at field hockey. Like, my ego was like through the roof in field hockey. I would have never given it up. Um, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And I played with some of my best friends. But yeah, I also don't think my parents would have allowed me to just do one sport. It's interesting now because when I was in high school, we were always told like college coaches love when their athletes play multiple sports and like
Yeah.
do something every single season. And now I don't know if that's still the case. I know like my college coaches always loved when kids play different sports because they were like they have skills from other types of sports, but then beyond that, it also helps prevent injuries because you're working out other muscles and you're not
Hmm.
overusing certain ones. But yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. So when you get to Duke, you already said that there was a humbling academic experience. What was it like athletically when you're now playing Division 1 lacrosse and the practices are obviously harder and balancing life is a little bit harder? What's that new life at Duke like?
Lacrosse was so hard. I mean, our freshman year, we went to the Final Four, and the seniors were like lights out. They were so good. I mean, I got to play with some of the best players in the nation, not just my freshman year, but throughout all 4 years. And freshman year was very intimidating. Um, they were just like so good. Like, you'd like look up to them, but also you'd be like, wait, I have to pass you the ball, or like, wait, I have to defend you. Like, what the hell? Um, so it was a lot. And freshman year is just in general a huge adjustment
Hmm.
beyond academics and athletics. Like, you're living alone in a dorm, you're kind of on your own for the first time. Like, I thought of myself as pretty independent in high school. Like, I even still was like, oh my God, like, I have to figure out I like dinner, like, you have to remember to feed yourself. Like, it's just like all these things that you never really think about and you kind of take for granted.
Yeah.
Um, and that, yeah, that fall was really, really hard. I think the transition just from being, living at home to living, I was like 4 hours, 200 miles away. They were a phone call away, but still not, my parents were a phone call away, but still not the same.
Hmm.
I don't know. Transitions are hard. I don't think people talk about it enough. And I don't think high schoolers take it seriously enough until they're going through it. Like, they're like, it's probably not that bad. I'm like, no, it's like it's very tough.
It's very
It's
tough.
very tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as your career's going on, you come in as a freshman, you're trying to earn it, right? What kind of talk about your career a little bit? When do you make it onto the field? When do things start to turn for you?
Yeah, I think to be honest, I had a unique experience where my freshman year was like I got exponentially better from the beginning of my freshman year to the end of my freshman year where I was like, I can make it onto the field next year. And I'd spent all summer working really, really hard. And I came in and my coaches were like, holy shit. Like they were like, you look faster, you look stronger, like you're guarding our best like I was kind of firing on all cylinders and I was feeling really good. And then I tore my labrum in my hip, which was a bummer. And I tried to avoid getting surgery. And I really, really wanted to play and I wanted to hold off. And ultimately, I, in January of my sophomore year, like preseason, was taking a shower in the dorm and my whole hip gave out. And I was like, had to crawl back to my room. Like, it was just the worst experience. And I was like, I can't live like this. Like, I
Yeah.
was like, I can't be having to take Benadryl every night to sleep because my hip pain is so badly. I can't, I was like, I shouldn't even be doing this for a week, let alone 3 months. And then also on top of that, I was like, okay, say that I play, like say that I practice, it doesn't even guarantee that I'm going to get in the games. So it was like, is it worth it to wear down my body for the next 3 months? Or is it worth it to get the surgery, come back, be a really great teammate, learn from like coaching, like learn from being next to the coaches and from supporting my teammates and whatever that may be. And that was like the decision I made was to get the surgery. And then kind of segueing into that, I in the summer had like started playing pickup lacrosse and my hip kind of started giving out again and I was like, this is not good. And then in the fall found out it was, or I guess in the spring of junior year found out it was torn again. So then I had to get another surgery. So I was kind of in and out at practices. Like my body just was not where it needed to be. My mental health was not where it needed to be either because for so long I had associated myself with being some type of athlete and then all of a sudden you're no longer even able to walk. Like being on crutches is also really hard.
Hmm.
Um yeah, so then I got the second surgery and then I ultimately had a third one. So I unfortunately well not for unfortunately, fortunately I was like leader of the bench. I loved being on scout team. Like I don't know. I really did like my role, even though I'm not in any of the books, of the stat books, or my playing time was like very minuscule. But I felt like I had an impact even from the sidelines, which I don't know. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Hmm. So yeah, you touched on it a little bit. Being injured is really hard. Not just physically, but mentally. What did you do to kind of get over those mental hurdles? Did you, seek out help? Did you talk to friends, talk to your parents? Like, how did you get past that?
Great question. After my first surgery, I was very optimistic about like my athletic career and then school was going great. And then I kind of got injured again and it was this weird thing where everyone was telling me it's just the scar tissue, like it's just healing, you know, keep working through it. And I was like,
Mhm.
no, something's wrong, something's wrong. So I kind of felt like I was going crazy in my head because I'm like, no, like I feel like something's wrong, but everyone's telling me it's not and kind of making me feel like I'm crazy and making me feel like I'm being a baby about sitting out of some practices. And like my solution to that was like, I can't play defense for 3 hours, but I could play attack where I don't have to sit in a 90-degree angle and I have great hands. And I played midi in high school. So I was like, let's switch to attack and see if that helps, which like helped a little bit, but I still was like not performing how I wanted to. And that doesn't even mean like performing to start in a game or to get off the bench in the game. It was like performing to make an impact at practice and get my teammates better. Like I didn't feel like I was doing that. I was trying to figure out like internships. Everything was kind of just like grinding away. Like nothing was really going right, so to speak. And I really lacked perspective of everything that I did have in my life, which I think is critical, is when you're struggling with things, it's so easy to focus on what we don't have versus what we do. Um, and I got this second surgery and I wasn't in a good mental place. And then I got the second surgery and my mental health it just dropped. And I spent the summer in Durham, North Carolina at Duke PTing. I just felt like almost like Eeyore. Like I felt like there was like a cloud over my head everywhere I went. And I like would sleep when I wasn't PTing or like doing things for an internship. I would sleep, but no one was around me to really see it, because I'd like go see friends for an hour and then I'd go back to my apartment, or I'd do this and then I'd go back to my apartment. But my parents weren't around, so all they saw from it was like me on the phone or me texting them. And it wasn't until September of my senior year where I'd be driving home, and this is like, I mean, hopefully I don't freak out too many people on this, but I'd be like driving home and I'd be on I-95 and I'd be like, I could just like drive the car into the river and it would be over. Like I wouldn't do it, but I would think that. Like, and it wasn't until, and those were like constant thoughts I would have, but I never was actively planning on hurting myself. And it wasn't until September where I was sitting in like the law school with one of my best friends, and I kind of was like, holy shit, like I think this is it. Like if I go home tonight, I don't think I'm gonna wake up in the morning. Like it kind of came to this point of like, it's either I get help or I see myself out. And I realized that I didn't know what to do. Like no one like ever tells you you could feel this way or feel that way, or, sorry, I'm like tearing up. It gets so emotional to talk about it. But no one ever prepares you for that. And then thank God my mom picked up the phone and I was like, I need to fly home. I was like, find a psychiatrist. I don't care who I talk to, but I was like, something is not right. So I flew home and I got help, and it was the best decision to this day that I've ever made. So yeah.
And now, you're on to the next phase of life where, you talked about the nonprofit and the driving force behind that. Give us a little bit more insight on what made you start that and continue that, and how you started that.
Yeah. One of my friends at Duke, Morgan Rogers, she actually grew up not too far from me in Northern Virginia, and she was the grade below me, and she was like a freak athlete. So athletic, so talented, and she got injured. She tore her ACL, and I think tore everything. Like I think they had to completely reconstruct, like grade 3, they had to completely reconstruct her knee. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like parallels. Like she was injured while I was injured. We both were kind of struggling with our mental health. I was a year older, so she kind of like leaned on me with some things. Ultimately, like when I got help, she was kind of going through her crisis. And then when I made my turnaround, I was a safe space for her. So I kind of watched her go through all of these ups and downs, and I like was like we were there for each other. And ultimately when she decided to, like when she died in 2019, it really hit home, because I was like, that could have been me. Mm-hmm. Like, and it also hit home because the 6 months prior were the happiest and like most like the Morgan we knew that I'd seen her. And for the year and a half before that, I was always on edge. Like I'd always be like, oh my God, like is today the day that I find out that like Morgan's not with us anymore? It was like one of those things where it just hit really hard, because for so long we were on edge, and finally I was like, okay, she's good. Like she's finally in a good place. She's excited about life again. And then she was gone. And a year later, I wanted to go visit her gravesite on her birthday. And so I called up her mom, and I was really, really nervous to call her mom, because I don't have kids, but I can't imagine. I mean, I have a dog. I can't imagine, like, I don't know, it's just like unfathomable to be like, hey, can I like come visit like Morgan's tombstone? Like, that's really, really hard. I also didn't know if she was going to be like, what happened? Like, did you know about anything? Like, did Morgan talk to you? And I was not ready even a year later to like get into a conversation about all of that. And like I knew she'd be looking for answers, and I like didn't think I had any. And if
Mm-hmm.
I had any, I didn't think they would sit well. But I went, and it was such a good thing that I did. I went with like my mom and one of my other teammates, Ann Slusser, and we went and we sat with her for like 3 hours at our house after we saw Morgan. And from there I was like, Ann and I both were like, something needs to be done for these student athletes. Like, Morgan's story isn't one in a million. Like, it's what, like, we both had gone through our own mental health struggles, and we both were like, people go through this all the time and are so scared to talk about it and don't even know how to like name what they're feeling. And you know, there are people who end up dying by suicide. Like, something needs to be done. How can we do something? How can we start something? Because clearly there's nothing out there. Like, we felt like we didn't have any resources at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
And so about a month later, a group of us, Morgan's twin sister, Aberly, Donna, Morgan's mom, Megan Burney, and Claire Kehoe, who were her teammates in high school on their club team, and then two of our other teammates, we founded Morgan's Message with the hope of like creating some type of storytelling platform so athletes wouldn't ever feel alone. And we didn't want anyone to lose their Morgan. Like, we were like, we don't want this to happen to anyone else. So what can we do to at least mitigate it or help one person? And that kind of expanded and grew into an ambassador program where we have Morgan's Message ambassadors at a ton of different campuses, and then our podcast, The Mental Matchup, which I lead. So it's been awesome. I don't know if there's any parts you want me to dig into. That was a lot of talking.
No, that was great. You know, it was literally every question that I had, you answered before I even got to it. You know, and with that, like I want to move to what is, you know, normally my last question for people, and wrap this up with you is, what type of advice would you give, you know, aspiring Division 1, 2, 3, you know, college athletes who want to get onto the field, who want to go on to the next level, who are thinking about being athletes on that next level? What type of advice would you give them?
Whew. I think the best advice, and not just in athletics, but in life, is that you can't place your value on you as what you do. Like, what you do is not who you are. So once you start associating the accolades and you start associating what schools are looking at you with your value as a human, you're never going to be able to succeed in terms of like being happy. Like, nothing's ever going to feel good. But if you really think about your value as just being who you are, like being a human being through and through, that I think is where the other pieces will fall into place. I see so many athletes who are so hard on themselves, or student athletes who are so hard on themselves, and who are not like turn into monsters, but they talk poorly about their teammates because they want to be on the field, right? And because they're feeling like they're not valued because they're not putting numbers up on the board. And I think once we kind of get to a place where we are okay with being us, whether or not we get to the school, whether or not we get the calls, that's where you're going to be able to find joy in like the little things, and ultimately, honestly, like play better. Like, the teammates I had who played the best, who played the loosest, who played the fastest, were the ones who were like, fuck it. Like, sorry, I don't know if I can curse, but they were
You
like,
can curse as much as you want.
they were like, whatever, like, who cares what the coaches think? Who cares what they think? Like, and they were the ones who ultimately were the most successful, I found, because they didn't have that pressure on themselves that like, if I don't step on the field, I'm a failure or this or that. So that would be my life advice and my athletic advice.
That's perfect. That's everything. I have no more questions for you. I think that was amazing. You have a really great message. I think it's definitely something that everyone should hear and listen to. And they should also be seeking out, help. That's like the number one thing that I think everyone should definitely need, whether it's athletics or life in general. Always seek out help when you need it. Never think that you are exempt or too mentally tough, or that it's a sign of weakness. And I think that's something that a lot of athletes struggle with, is that they think, oh, I just have to be tougher. I have to get through this mentally. And, I think I'm glad that more people and more athletes like yourself are doing things more for athletes to help with mental health. It's a very big deal. And I'm glad that it's now more of a central topic. When I was an athlete, it's not something that people talked about a lot. I graduated from college in 2009. It really wasn't something that people talked about hardly ever. So it's, like I said, I'm glad that you guys started, Morgan's Message, and you're doing so many great things. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to let you go. Do you have anything else before we end today?
Yes, my last thing would be, I think that anyone listening, like, just be a little nicer, just smile at a stranger, be nicer to yourselves, first of all, like, don't be so hard on yourself. Um, and just know that try to assume that everyone has the best of intentions. I know, again, a little bit naive to live life that way, but I think it makes life a little brighter. And ask for help if you think you need it. That's my other big one. Like, kind of what you said. I think there, in the past, and still there is some shame in the stigma of mental health, or in, asking for a tutor if you're failing a class. But there's nothing wrong with it. There's a reason there's no manual for life, and people can't create a manual. We make our own manual by reaching out and asking for help when we need it.